Well, Kay, thank you so much for being on the Entrepreneurial Success Podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here. Before we get started with all the good stuff, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and and who you help?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the honor is all mine. Like I was telling you before we hit record, I've had a chance to listen into the podcast and hear the awesome stories you've been featuring. So I'm really excited to be here. So I am a visibility strategist. My official title is the Story Finder, and I specialize in working with underrepresented leaders and entrepreneurs to amplify their voices and grow their audiences and impact by sharing the power of their story. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I've been living in Madrid, Spain, where we find me today recording since 2010. So my life is in Spanglish. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with business owners in 2 languages across 17 different industries now.
My goodness.
Across multiple languages and cultures. Well, multiple cultures, rather. You can cut out the multiple languages part because I just said 2. So I had the pleasure of working with business owners across 17 different industries and across 2 languages in English and Spanish. I'm really excited to be here and talk about the power of sharing your story and showing up and being the first for your community, and rather than waiting for someone else to give you permission, even if the world that you want to see currently doesn't reflect or mirror your reality back to you. So my mission is to empower people who traditionally don't see themselves represented in, whether it's media or industries or business or whatever it happens to be, to give them the courage and the story that they need to show up and stand up for themselves and for the communities that are looking to them for leadership.
I think that's fantastic, which is why I'm so excited to have you here, because I think in some senses that's in my audience, because I'm coaching female entrepreneurs as well. When it comes to visibility, there's that kind of sense that they don't know where to start. They're a bit scared. But before we get into all of that, because I know you've got some great tips to share with us today, what made you start your own business? What was the passion and the motivation behind you starting and ending up in Spain?
I know, like any good story, it's never a linear line. It's more like a squiggly spaghetti noodle. So I'll try and keep it brief with the highlight reel. But basically, growing up as someone who identifies as Filipino American in Los Angeles, California, I learned the power of story and sharing stories quite early on, because like many people who have, we'll say, non-European faces know, you often get asked the second question of where are you from, and then followed by where are you really from. And I think when you're a kid, especially when all you want to do is fit in, that question can be quite jarring. And when you start to notice that it's a pattern, I realized there was a crossroads in my life when I was about 7 or 8, where I realized I could either clench my fists and always get defensive and see it as, well, I'm really from California, or I'm really from Los Angeles, or I could extend my hands and share my story. And I remember the first time that someone asked me that question on the playground, and I saw how, rather than me cutting it off with a sort of quick quip or a sort of ego-driven answer of I'm really from here, I just told them my background. I said my parents immigrated from the Philippines. I was born here in the States, and I grew up here in California, just down the street. And I saw how that was able to engage the person in front of me in conversation, rather than cutting off the dialogue before it even started. And that power of how you can use and leverage your own story to change hearts and minds never really left me. As even growing up, and then leaving California, studying in college in the East Coast, then eventually landing here in Spain. I think that the cool thing has been how I've learned the power of stories to, not just advocate for myself and open the worldview of the person in front of me, but help others advocate for themselves as well, and open up those connections. And so that power of story, I realized, ended up being a skill I could leverage when I decided to start my own business here in Spain. And it was something that brands were struggling with at the time. With inbound marketing was still quite new, and especially being here as someone who is bilingual, I got to work with a lot of really great Spanish brands to help them, connect their message to their audience in a way that there it was driven by an emotional connection rather than a talking at you. And story was the way that I did that. I like to joke that empathy is my superpower. So it doesn't matter what audience you have, you know, within the span of a week, to give an example to people who are listening, I had, I had, you know, two different, completely different, like opposite ends of the spectrum clients that, I mean, they couldn't literally be polar opposites, but one was, you know, a solopreneur who was looking to create a library around, you know, people who wanted to dabble a little bit in spirituality. And the other end was a startup that was working in robotic processing automation and cloud technology, and was trying to build out their 10 different verticals across 5 different countries to reach their audience. And so it doesn't matter how big the audience or how straightforward the messaging seems like it is. It really just comes down to, how do I speak to the people that I want to attract? How do I raise my banner up high so that the people who see that will not just want to fly under it, but they'll want to engage with me and recognize, like, oh, finally someone's starting this conversation, or finally somebody's created this solution, or finally, you know, I have a space where I feel like I belong, where I can be seen and heard. And that's ultimately what all stories come down to. And that's what drives all of the visibility strategies that I teach. And so why Spain specifically? Well, that's another sort of spaghetti noodle. I studied abroad here in undergrad or university, for the Brits who are listening. And I really loved I'd always loved the Spanish language. It was something that growing up in California, you hear quite often. And it was when I was much younger that I realized, like, oh, there's actually an entire group of people that speak this language, that learning this, what felt like just a way to get from exam to exam and memorizing vocabulary, like, this is a real life thing that I can use. And that then eventually led to me studying international relations and economics, and my language of choice was Spanish. And I had the opportunity to study abroad here at the university center that we had in Madrid. And I just fell in love with the country and the culture. It was so different from everything that I'd really grown up with. It was very warm. It was engaging. It was inviting. I like a good challenge. And so every time I was picking up the vocabulary, I saw every word and phrase and grammatical structure that I was adding to my arsenal almost felt like up leveling in a game. And I really, really enjoyed my experience here. And so, you know, shortly after, you know, I returned, I finished my degree, I got my first job. And this is where the spaghetti noodle kind of curves downward. My first job, I was really lucky to have a job, at least from my perspective, in the midst of a recession. And I wanted to make myself indispensable to my employer. I was excited to be there, and I felt really grateful to not have to go back to school and take on more student loan debt, to be able to get a master's degree to try and wait out the recession like some of my friends did, or move back home because there were literally no jobs in the market. So I didn't want to be made redundant, and I worked really, really hard, and to the point where I burnt out at age 22. I remember very specifically calling my parents back in California, because I was on the East Coast at the time, and saying, I've been crying for 4 hours straight. I don't know what's wrong with me. What do I do? And that sort of journey led to everything that I believe I stand for now as a business owner, which is, I never wanted, either for my clients that I work with or for the business that I'm creating, to ever be built at the expense of either my mental health or this sort of what feels like a very unhealthy trend towards the hustle and the, you know, productivity, and your worth and your work are somehow considered equal. Because I was collateral damage from that mentality, for whether it was by my own design or by the society that I grew up in, or just simply because of the circumstances and my own decisions. I didn't know limits or boundaries or anything like that at the time. And so the recovery process then required me to, you know, figure out, to go from asking the wrong questions of how was I not able to keep up with everyone else, to asking the right questions of, rather than thinking ahead 10 million steps as a high achiever, what feels like the next right step for you so that you can work your way out of where you're at right now, which is depression. And so, yeah, it, one of, in that series of questions of what feels like the next right thing, it ended up with me being here in Spain. Spain sounded like the next right thing. It was only supposed to be for a year because it felt like a happy place and a nice way to, double down on Spanish, which I'd loved and always wanted to get fluent in, to, change my surroundings. And I was lucky to be in a position of privilege that I could do that, support myself teaching English. So I had a way to travel and also, kind of get in my head, I think I was like, get Europe out of your system and then you can come back and find a real job. Because, plans are obviously, set in stone once you decide on them. Laugh at them. And then, I met my now partner, my husband here, who is Spanish, and I've been here since 2010. So almost 10 years later at the time of this recording, this is where I've created my home. And, all the lessons that I took with me from, burning out, from growing up in California, where I realized the power of story to connect people and how I could encourage people to show up more fully as themselves, because it's not even just for the audience that you're trying to attract. It's also for your own stability. It's for your own, in this case, for me, your own mental health. With the fact that I now get to have a life and a business that I've designed to make sure that I'm always okay first so that I can show up and serve others best, I think is a real gift and has been from a long healing journey of, this is what I know doesn't work for me, and this is what I know I need to do for myself to show up sustainably for others.
Yeah. And I think it's so important what you're saying as well is, and I love the way you describe it. It's like a little noodle. There's no straight line. There's always ups and downs and downward spirals and upward spirals. They're everywhere. But you also wrote a book and you published the book yourself. And I think this is something that I'm really intrigued about because you used your own story for your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think you guys might be noticing a trend listening to this. A lot of things kind of just, they land in front of me and they're never really exactly what you think they will be. Like, my plan was never to become an author. But it was in the process of when my younger sister was moving away from working in a traditional workplace to starting her own personal endeavor, creative endeavor for herself, that when we were having these discussions of, she was saying to herself, I feel like, and this was her ripe old age of 27 at the time we were having this conversation, I feel like it's too late for me to start something new. And I'm like, no, no, it's not. I absolutely know what it's like to feel like it's too late for me at 22. And that sort of headspace that I was in when I burnt out and thinking like, oh, everyone else is moving ahead of me. And because I'm in this state where I feel like I don't have a way forward, I'm being left behind. And so after that conversation with her, I sat down to write a series of love letters of my reflections from what I've learned over the past 10 years. And really for me, it was one of those things where one love letter then led to another. And then I realized I had a book on my hands, and then it turned into the book that I have now. So it was really just, so the idea behind Rewrite Your Story. So the full title is Rewrite Your Story, How to Find Who You Are and Thrive After Burnout. It's chronicling my recovery from burnout, but also, I call it a memoir meets how-to guide, because I think there's the older sister part of me that never really went away from how it started, mixed in with my stories and my anecdotes and growing up as a Filipino American, growing up as somebody who, was a high achiever, and, then being forced to stop by my circumstances and then have to decide, well, what does a fulfilling life on my terms look like for me? And I know I talk about burnout as the turning point for me, but one of the beautiful things about this book, and from the initial reviews that have come in since the book was published on Amazon, is that people have reached out to me and said, it feels like I have a coach on my coffee table. It feels like you were speaking to me, even though I'm at just a career pivot in my life and I'm looking for a way forward. These exercises have been super helpful for me. Or people who have said, I've never experienced burnout, but I've gained so much value from just you asking me to, what does the story of my life that I want to live actually look like? And how can I reflect enough to decide what that is for me?
Yeah.
And so that's been really, really cool, getting to turn what for me, my sort of dip in that spaghetti noodle. We're going to call this the spaghetti noodle episode, everyone. um, what I realized in that process of writing my story and reflecting and taking all the lessons that I've gathered along the way to help me recover and design a life that looks truly aligned with who I am, has been so healing for myself, but also really it comes back to the title of the book. It's never too late to rewrite your story.
Yeah.
Really. You can decide tomorrow that you either, by circumstances or by design, that your life is not exactly how you want it to look like. And you get to decide, well, this isn't what I want it to look like. What do I want it to look like? And then work backwards from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really cool to see 10 years later how much can actually happen, from a place that felt at the time very dark and dismal and very, very hard to imagine anything that looks like what it looks like now. So yeah, it's been really cool.
And I have to say, I take my hat. How can I say? I take my hat off to you, which is a proper English term. But in so many ways, when you were in that dark place, as you're saying, for you to realize that you need to make a change, you need to get out of that place. I mean, taking that step and having that mind change at that moment in time, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of guts. So, heartfelt, I can just, say, wow, it's incredible to see that for somebody who's been in a dark place, but realized this is not who I am, this is not where I want to be, I need to get out of it. And what you've achieved and what you've accomplished, now where you are now. So yeah, for anybody who's listening, who do feel that you're going through a little bit of a depression stage, or you may be in a dark place at the moment, I can honestly say, learn from Kay. It's just, you never know what's going to happen. It's never too late to rewrite your own story. There's always a chance for you to do it all over again and make it better, even better than it was before. The one part I really want to ask you about as well is when it comes to the visibility part again, apart from you, just for yourself and your business, you self-published your book, which is something that a lot of people don't always say you should do because it's a million times harder. But you decided to take that step and to do something which most people think is impossible to do. Talk to us about that. How did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I think that, maybe a blessing or a curse is, as a recovering overthinker, I overthink and then I get sick of myself and then I just do.
That's brilliant.
And I don't know if that's going to work for everybody, but it's worked for me all right, I think, in most cases. And so when it came to self-publishing, I mean, for me, I think the other beauty of this book is, as a business owner, and I know a lot of people that I've spoken to are like, wow, how did you write a book so fast? And I was, well-meaning, obviously, biz besties and friends, like, where does it fit into your overall funnel? And I'm like, it doesn't. Like, I really wanted to get this story out there because I know for a fact it felt out of integrity to me, because I'm encouraging my audience and my clients all the time to show up and share their stories, because it's one person's story that gives another person permission to feel seen and heard and eventually share theirs. And that was what this book was for me. I mean, honestly, it's, if you're looking at my, profit pathway, if you want to call it that, it doesn't fit anywhere. It's really just, I was so grateful that, I've seen so many people come forward and share their own mental health stories, struggles, depression, anxiety, people that I admire and look up to. And I'm just so thankful that now there are more voices and more people giving a voice or giving visibility or shedding light on things which are still relatively taboo, and for me are so critical to not just how I operate, but also how I started my business. And so the fact that the cultural vocabulary has caught up with what I was experiencing 10 years ago, when I felt alone and that it was my fault and somehow I was implicit in my situation because there's no one talking about it. It was more important for me to get it out quickly rather than worry about the hows and the whats and the whys of where this all fit. And so self-publishing sounded like a very attractive idea to me. It was me also putting into action my notion of when you do things imperfectly, it's better than not doing it at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, I self-published. I put it on Amazon. I realized in the process of putting it out there that obviously there are some things that it would be nice to have had an agent or somebody in PR to be putting me in a bunch of different places. But for me, it was a learning experience, and I enjoyed it from start to finish because the book from start to finish has just been nothing but a joy. And when it came to self-publishing on Amazon, I mean, there were so many lessons I learned that I'm happy to share with anybody. If you are listening to this podcast and you want to jam on what self-publishing looks like, I've got my knowledge is your knowledge. I wish somebody had told me about this before I went down 50 research rabbit holes for every step of the Amazon publishing process. So I published it in Kindle, on the Kindle version. I published it on paperback. Had to get ISBN numbers for both because apparently you need different ones for both. And the other thing that I learned about the self-publishing process was this idea of categories, of positioning your book so that people can find it. And because mine was a memoir meets how-to guide, I thought, cool, I've got a category for each of those. And so the how-to guide, I think I ended up choosing no, it wasn't even productivity. It was happiness. I think self-esteem, happiness, personal development. I think it was right around something around that, on those lines. And so I was looking for memoir, and I thought, how cool would it be to, for somebody like me who grew up, didn't see as many faces or stories like hers reflected back to her, how cool would it be to have it under like Asian American memoirs, right? And I thought that would be amazing. So I'm going through the categories to select what I wanted on Amazon. And the first category that I saw was, okay, memoirs, cool. Subcategory, ethnic and national. I was like, awesome. And then I went to scroll to find mine, and there was Black and African national, there was Native American, there was Latinx and, Hispanic, but there wasn't one for Asian and Asian American, which I thought was very, very striking to me, because either it was for one of two reasons. Either there weren't enough stories for it to merit a public category, because I think there's something like 75,000 categories on Amazon, and they only make a portion of those public, or there wasn't enough demand for those stories. So that was something that was really telling for me, and it just motivated me even further to get this book out, because I thought, well, how cool is it for somebody to see my face on the cover and then say, there's something that I've learned in the research that I've done for, my own clients, for my own diversity and inclusion advocacy, and the work that I get to do with corporates around this, is that when you see somebody who looks like you or loves like you or lives like you reflected back to you, it expands your idea of what success can look like for you.
Yes.
And I mean, that's for all of us, right? Especially the women who are here nodding along and listening to this podcast. We haven't seen up until recently that many representations or reflections of us as successes, quote unquote, reflected back to us for many of us growing up. Some of us in our own families are the black sheep who are charging a new path, and nobody really knows what to do with us, right? But it's us moving forward. It's us just by showing up. We're almost a silent protest. And that was what this book was for me. It was, well, this is my silent protest of like, hey, like if some other Asian American or Filipino American or somebody who identifies as Asian or a woman of color sees this and says, wow, I can add my voice to this, to personal development. I can add my memoir to all of the millions of books that there are about different people's stories because I saw somebody else do it. I mean, that was what this was for me. So for me, it was getting it out quicker rather than focusing on the hows and the strategy and the how-tos. The second book, which I'm working on, will probably fit more into the work that I'm doing. But the first book was more a labor of love from start to finish. Yeah. I truly enjoyed it.
Oh, that's amazing. And what we'll do is we'll link to the book as well in the show notes. So if you're interested to go and have a look at Kay's book, then by all means go and have a look at the link down in the show notes. Coming back to visibility, let's talk about the 3 steps to show up and just be visible for yourself and for your business. Because with all your years of experience, there's some 3 steps that you've come up with that you want to talk to us about. So why don't I just hand over to you and you just talk through us every single step and just, like I said, just let it loose, because I love having these conversations and I love just talking to you about it. One thing I want to touch up on, as you were saying this now through all of your research working with clients, for being visible and having people seeing you as a person who's come that far, who's gained that success, and for them to then reflect themselves in you and think, oh my gosh, if she can do it, I can do it, which is the common sentence everybody would use. But I think that is so true, because especially now, these time and age, for us growing up, we didn't have technology at our disposal as people have today. So having more visibility for somebody who is getting to that point of becoming successful, and then people can reflect in themselves in that person and seeing that, Kay's done it. So if Kay did it, then I can definitely do this. And I think putting it in the sense of where people can use technology to get visibility for themselves in a good way, where they can obviously motivate other people in order to do the same for themselves. I think that is such an important point. And I just wanted to bring it out again and just explain it and kind of like pinpoint it out a bit, because I think it is so much so important for this time and age for people of a younger generation to understand that when it comes to visibility for yourself, it is not just to show everybody what you're having for lunch. It's about doing something for somebody else, showing that there is progress, there's possibilities, and there is ways to get out of any situation you're in once you want to go out and make a better life for yourself. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to reiterate that and just go back on it, because I think it's so important. When you mentioned it, it just had this little spark going off above me, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is so important. But why don't you talk to us about the 3 steps to show up and be visible?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you doubled down on that, because really, like you said, visibility, I think visibility is such an interesting term because people get to define it however they want. Yes. But for me, visibility really comes down to the responsibility that you have, not just to your business, but to your audience, to show up and lead change, to give a voice to, like you said, somebody who hasn't seen themselves represented or hasn't found their story reflected back to them before, as a woman of color, as a minority of some sort. It's a responsibility that you have to show up and stand up for them, because you shouldn't have to. And that actually is a perfect segue into the first tip that I have for you folks today, which is, don't be afraid to be the first. I mean, would it be great for all of our communities to have an equivalent of Oprah and Beyonce? Yeah. But even they're unicorns, right? So like, rather than waiting for, I think as I've found my voice on even, my identity, diversity, inclusion, I think for a long time I shied away from these conversations because I was scared. I was scared that I didn't have enough knowledge or vocabulary. I was scared that I didn't have the solution. I was scared because I thought, oh, somebody else is way more qualified than me. And mostly I was just sitting there waiting and giving myself an excuse, because I said somebody else will start the conversation. That's, I don't want to touch that. Like, it seems somebody else give me the blueprint and I'll go forward, right? But I found that that's obviously not the case. And obviously I couldn't really stand by and stay silent on when I work with so many game changers and industry leaders to do that for their audiences, that it felt like I said, out of integrity for me to sit and wait. So for you, if you're listening to this and you're worried about, well, somebody's going to judge me, or, I haven't seen examples of my story reflected back to me in the reality that I see in my business or in my industry or my country or whatever, just show up, be that first person, because I can promise you, if you're waiting for more representation that's indicative of your reality, you may be the change that people have been waiting for, including yourself. So that's the first tip that I would say, which is be willing to be that first and share your story in the process, because you never know who finds power in that story and who can add on to the conversation because you've given them permission.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sharing your story, the second tip I have for you to be visible is showing why you care, basically the 3 whys. So why you care. So obviously the journey that's led you to this path, this thing, this product, this service, this cause, and really conveying that. I think that's the beauty of stories for me, that they touch so much on emotion, and there's something so primal about our desire for connection that there's a reason why podcasts like this one are so attractive to people, because you have much more in-depth conversations than I think, our sort of tweet driven conversation that you see on or social media that tends to be very, very, noisy and static and kind of just one way. You get to decide in the stories that you share, not only framing for people why I'm doubling down on this cause or why I'm doubling down on this direction in my life and business, but also by showing why you care, you call people to join in your cause. You encourage them to not only see themselves reflected back in your story in a parallel to their own lives, but also that you've created whatever you've created, or you've come to this conclusion from a place of a genuine desire to serve. And I think that's what people, at least I've found in the clients that I've worked with and the case studies that I've seen, that's what people really resonate with. People are looking for deeper connection, deeper belonging, a sense of meaning. And if you are able to convey that in why you exist, then I think that your visibility efforts start to feel much easier, because they always come back to, well, this is who I am.
Yes.
Letting people know why you, because it, like I said, it could be anyone, but if you're showing up, it's for a reason. You either have the unique blend of qualifications and skills, you have had an aha moment, you have the expertise, you have the experience, and I'm sure this has been talked about amongst women a lot. So I'm going to say it has been talked about on this podcast, this idea of imposter syndrome. And women, we sell ourselves short. So don't, why you? I'm pretty sure if you feel called by your heart and soul to do it, to show up, then you obviously know a thing or two about it. So don't underestimate yourself. And why now? I think it's really important to reflect to people what's at stake if they don't do something about it. Because I think the best stories aren't just the ones that connect emotionally, but are the ones that actually tell people, here's the urgency of, if we wait and we let things go, then we'll promote and preserve the status quo. But if you want to do something different, this is what I'm calling you to do. And so why you care, why now, and why you in your story. And the last tip I would say for being visible is, I kind of referenced this earlier in our sort of tweet culture. Podcasts are so attractive to me because as an introvert, I crave deeper conversations and insights, which is why I think I'm even called to open my own at some point. I don't know, TBD. You guys will know. I'll be sure to let Henrietta know also as well. But I think one of the reasons why is because I've seen how, given the climate that we live in and the times that we live in, everything has become much more reactive and much more cruel. And sometimes it appalls me the type of dialogue that I tend to hear, not just, in the political sphere, but just the online sphere can sometimes, a lot of calling out and a lot of, saying this person didn't do this, and people can get quote unquote canceled because that's I'm an old millennial, so I'm not quite hip with what the kids are saying these days, but I'm told cancel culture is a thing. So, and that seems very counterintuitive to everything I stand for. And I think everybody who's listening to this podcast, including yourself, Henriette, stands for, which is we are trying to lead change, right? And change happens collectively, not in a vacuum. So rather than calling people out, I would encourage you to think in your content, how you show up online, whether it's your own podcast, your blog articles, your newsletters, your social media posts, or even with your own clients. How can you call people up? How can you call people up to the highest version of themselves? Get them to engage with you in a shared vision for how you want the world to be, to imagine a greater possibility for a shared future where all of you can thrive, rather than calling people out for what they did or didn't do, or how they fell short against some invisible barometer that ultimately doesn't matter. I think I think we're also craving elevated conversation. So if you are sitting there and wondering what types of ways that you can show up and be that first for other people, think of how you can call people up, because people, I think, just will naturally, my sense is people are naturally more drawn to that, because people want conversations that allow them to be seen and heard instead of attacked. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, polarization for polarization's sake is no good either. So those are my tips for showing up and being visible. And I think that ultimately it comes down to, it's what we were saying earlier that you said so beautifully. It comes down to, it's sharing your stories is not just yours alone. It's a responsibility and a call to arms for people who are waiting for you to lead them.
Yes. One of the things I also just want to touch upon, which you said so well, it comes down to the second point about show why you care, why you and why now. And I think that's so important. One of the things that I've found so many times is, because I'm a business coach as well. So when I speak to my students, or not just my students, but to so many other people as well, the first thing they ask me is like, well, I want to do this, and I want to show up, and I want to be visible, and I want to create this amazing thing where I can help other people, but somebody else is already doing that. And there's always that element where people think that there's competition and they've got to go against this competition. And for me, the way I see it, and the way I think we need to start changing our mindset about it is, yes, we grow up in a culture, in an environment. From kids, we're always being taught that there's competition in school. When you're doing sports, there's competition. When you're in the classroom, there's competition. And it's all about striving to be the best between you and another person, you and something else. So you're always running against something. But what I find is, in particular in the entrepreneurial world, that this competition is kind of exhausted in some way. Instead of just thinking that there's always competition and thinking about somebody else is doing what you want to do, you just need to go out there and do it. Just put your best foot forward, because yes, somebody else is doing what you're already doing, but there's abundance. There's enough for everybody out there. So for you to show that you care, your story is as unique as your DNA. So when you come forth from that place of showing that you care, having your own unique story, that makes you stand out. And then coming forth as to why you, well, firstly, because you're unique. Anybody who can see themselves in you through that visibility, you can reflect in your story and say, if she can do it, then I can do it. Yeah. Then you've made a change for that one person. And then why now? Oh my gosh, I mean, now is a better time as ever. Coming up with all the excuses and saying, somebody else is doing it, or I'm not there yet, I haven't got everything in place yet. It doesn't matter, just do it. The whole visibility sense is just so important. But I think the one big thing that is stopping people is that fear of competition, fear that they've got to be expected to be up there rather than starting somewhere and just working their way up and follow the noodle wherever the noodle leads you. Sorry, we can talk about noodles today.
Can you guys tell I really like food? Like I'll always work it in whenever I can.
Same here. No, but I really wanted to say that as well, because I think it is so important for people to understand that competition is kind of one of those things that are dragged out in so many senses. That's one of the reasons why I started the podcast, not just for visibility for what it is that I do, but also in order to have a platform for other entrepreneurs to come in and share their stories and to motivate the audiences. Doesn't matter where they are, what they're doing. And it's collaborating with other people that I think is so much more important. And it's got such a stronger bond than competition will ever have. So when it comes to visibility for yourself, for your business, yeah, it's the sky's the limit. You can do anything. You just gotta give yourself that permission to go out there and do it and not question yourself around every corner. Kay, this is really fantastic. I'm so excited about just, getting this podcast out there. I think it's so important. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience? Anything else that you wanted to bring to the table?
Yeah, I think, speaking to a little bit on what Henriette just said about if you're worried about competition, I think that you have to, look at any of your favorite artists nowadays, music artists in this case, and think how much paler the world would be if they decided, somebody's already made music.
Yes.
I don't need to. No, it's too competitive. It's too cutthroat. And you never knew they existed. And I think it's the same for us with our businesses and the causes and the movements that we're trying to start. It's, if competition is what's stopping you because you don't think you have an original idea, you have an original voice. And finding that voice and showing up and sharing it consistently, that's ultimately what's going to not just move you forward in your business and get your audience to know that you exist, but also every voice adds to the shared vocabulary that we have for what's possible. If one's missing, then that's an entire set of insights and ideas that we are robbed of if you don't show up. So yeah, that would be my final thoughts on visibility. Especially if you're from a group that has felt underrepresented or unseen and are unheard for so long, it's, now's the best time. There's no time like this instant, this moment for you to decide, okay, I'm ready for the world to hear my story.
Yes. You also have an excellent freebie, the free visibility guide. Talk to us a little bit about that and where people can get it from.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys head to my website, kayfabella.com/start here, I have a free visibility guide put together for you. That's the 5 keys to vibrant visibility to grow your tribe of raving fans. And so especially for the online business owners here, the struggle that it is between all the things that you're doing in a given day, visibility is important, but you don't really know how to get started. So whether it's infusing more you into your copy and content, or owning your expertise and stepping out of the shadows into the spotlight, or just learning how to show up in the words that you say for your audience to connect with you, that's what we cover inside my free visibility guide, which you can download there for free on my site.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And like I said, all the links for Kay will be in the show notes. So please go and have a look in there, in particular the free visibility guide as well. Kay, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I can't wait to just make sure everybody can hear it and share it out there. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this won't be the last time we talk to each other. I'm sure there's going to be many more opportunities in the future in order to have great discussions. But thank you again. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me.